Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everybody out there in podcast land. You are in tune to another episode of Intrinsic Motivation from a Homie's Perspective. This is Hamza, and really excited to speak with our guest today. We actually had him on our podcast before, so always great to have these experts come back when they have new things in the pipeline and talk about things that are very important in real time. And our guest today, we're going to talk about inequality in the educational system. This is going to be entitled, Are State School Tests Racist? And our guest, I'm actually want to read the bio before I introduce the guest, because I think the bio needs to be speaking in its totality to get the impact of what we're going to cover this hour. So standardized testing is far worse than a necessary evil. The way the test data is interpreted can also harm the impoverished minority schools that need the most encouragement. So says our guest. He's a longtime educator, administrator in public schools and universities. He says that data from these tests is used to rank schools and school districts and label them. So no matter what minority impoverished schools achieve, they will almost always be labeled as failures because it is and always has been a ranking system. So we survived this spring. That's why we wanted to talk to our guest today, because of the pandemic. So we didn't have the traditional trajectory of these ranking systems. So now is the time, since we're going through this flux, it's the time to devise a new system that encourages everyone. He just released his latest book, How to Create a Perfect School, and it also contains a foreword by our favorite, Jack Canfield. So we're going to talk about a better way to gather data and create more perfect schools. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Lee Jenkins to the podcast. Welcome, Lee.
Well, thank you, Hamza. It's a treat to be with you again, and certainly the topic is of utmost importance because we continue to go down the same path, which is harmful to so many of the schools. And so we'll talk through that. We've got lots to share with you on that topic.
I appreciate it. And the fact that we are in the middle of a pandemic, it made me think of how the business world has been upended in every facet of life, has been upended. And everyone that follows the stock market knows the technology companies are booming. And as a result, it's kind of flattened the curve where people are questioning these expensive schools, private schools and public schools. Is it worth it because it's all online now? What's going to happen with that? And by having you being in the trenches in all these realms, I'm just really happy to have you on.
Well, thank you. Just talking about all the schools, the online education. We know that for the majority of kids, it's less effective. For some, it can be more effective, but for the majority, it's not as effective. It's not. The teachers don't feel as good about it, and neither do the students. But one of the things I have not seen at all, because of my work, it's unique in the education field. I've not met anybody else who advocates what I'm advocating, which is that in a classroom, when we document what a child has done, that information's in a data folder and it's personal. It's their own progress. But what goes on the wall in the classroom is the total correct for the whole class. And even at 4 years old, when you put the total up for the whole class and you make a graph out of it, looking like any other graph, you want it to go up and up and up and up and up. It doesn't go up every week, but it goes up, probably half of the weeks. But when you look at it over the whole year, you see a picture of joy that the kids have because they see themselves as a team. And so if you think of a classroom as a team of learners, then you think, well, how in the world are we going to do online learning and create a team of learners? Because they're not together. And so it's like, but we don't think of it. We don't think of a classroom as a team. we think of it as a group of individual students, and it is that because every kid has a record of their own learning and is responsible for their own work. But there's tremendous joy that kids receive from helping the team do better. We know that in athletics, but we don't practice that in education. So that's one of the things we're really missing is the team. And so the places where I've worked that are online, they're frustrated because the kids aren't there and they don't have that team feeling of everybody helping everybody else in order to help the team. Now that's an aside. It's not the topic that we're going to talk about, but it is data and it is connected to some extent and what we're going to talk about on state assessment. But as an aside, the teams are gone. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, when we talk about state assessments, and I want to do a macro and then do micro. So when we talk about state school tests, it makes me think of it to be topical when we're talking about the crisis, this global pandemic that we're going through. And in the States, the higher-ups were, looking at death numbers, and they said, well, it would be really good if it wasn't this color state, between red and blue. So the country, if the country is divided on everyone's health, how healthy or how healthily mentally can we be as a country when we're not in the top 25 of literacy rates for a first world country? Like, do we need to approach this from a macro level and then go to the micro level?
Well, we certainly need to, if we're going to look at it from a national level and say, why are we not doing as well as we would expect to do compared to other countries? We have to say, well, what are the root causes of this problem? Why is it that way? And we, Dr. Deming, that I spent a lot of years listening to and learning from him, who's the one that actually took Japanese management to Japan. What he taught was a military secret during World War II. He's a statistician. But he said when things go wrong in Japan, they ask why until they find out why. And when things go wrong in the United States, we ask why until we find a who. So we're not used to digging down to what are the root causes of this failure in education. And in my book, How to Create a Perfect School, the second part of the book is identifying root causes. I've done more work on it in another book, but there's enough. So let's just look at it. What are the root causes of our failure? Number one, children have permission to forget everything that's taught. They know that they need to learn what's on this chapter test, and they need to be able to spit it out for Friday on the test, and then they forget it on Saturday. They know it's not coming up again. So it starts through first grade spelling, and it goes all the way through. There was an internet message I received and it was the graduation speech of the valedictorian. Of course, when you get something on the internet, it may not be right. But here's the speech that was purported that the valedictorian gave. She stood up at graduation and said, Mom and Dad, grandmas and grandpas, aunts and uncles, because I'm up here as a valedictorian, you think I'm the smartest kid in this high school. But I'm not. You've got it completely wrong. I'm not the smartest kid in this high school, but I'll tell you what I am. I am the very best kid in this high school at cramming. I can remember it overnight. Oh, can I remember it overnight? I spit it out the next day, and on Saturday I dump it all so that I have room to cram for the next test. I'm the very best at playing the game of anybody in this high school. And that sounds like, well, that may not be the true story that the valedictorian told, but it is true of what happens in schools, that it is cram, get a grade, forget, cram, get a grade, forget. I was in the dermatologist's office for my annual exam, and the dermatologist said, well, what do you do? And I said, well, I write books on education, and I get on airplanes, and I make presentations to administrators and teachers for conferences. Well, what do you tell them? And of course, when you're dermatology exam, you're sitting there in your underwear, and I was anxious to leave, and she kept pressing. Said, well, what do you teach them? And I said, well, I teach them how we can make cramming impossible. And that's the third part of the book, by the way. How do you make cramming impossible? We can do it. It's a system problem. And she said, you make cramming impossible? I said, yes. Well, that's really interesting. She said, that's what I did all the way through medical school. Cram and forget. And I'm in the doctor's office, and I said, I'm thinking, well, maybe I'm in the wrong office. And I said, well, when do you learn? She said, that's what residency is for. So think about that system. You can get scholarships, you can get honors, you can become a doctor because you're so good at cramming and forgetting. Okay? So that's root cause number one. That is our system. Root cause number two is that we use data for harm instead of data for joy. And data needs to be used for joy. We don't. And it goes back to the ranking you mentioned on the for state tests, but it's not ranking. It's not ranking only for state tests. It's in the classrooms. I've got pictures of the bulletin boards, actual bulletin boards from classrooms, and the teacher went through a lot of work to make a bulletin board, a huge one, probably 8 foot by 5 foot, to make it look like a football field. And then she made a helmet for every kid, big, bold letters for every kid on their helmet. And she thought she was going to motivate the kids to move their helmet across the field. As they learned something, they moved from the 0-yard line to the 10 and learned again. They went to the 20 and on down the line. Well, when you look at it, you could see who the winners were, and then there's the losers. 5 kids at the end hadn't made it to the 1-yard line yet. So, and the problem is the kid that bulletin board's in a second grade, but the first grade teacher had another kind of bulletin board, which wasn't a football field, but it was similar. And the kindergarten teacher had something else. The picture I have is gumball machines with, the more you learn, the more you get to color your gumballs in, but it's posted for everybody to see. And so year after year, the same kid's being ranked as the loser over and over and over. So we use data for harm instead of data for joy. We give permission to forget. And the third one is...
Wait, before you go to the third one, I want to put a pin before I forget, because I know you're on the stream of consciousness. But I want to ask, right, the first one, you're talking about permission to forget, and you're talking about the root cause. So, schools are usually funded, especially in the public realm, based off of test scores. And usually, the tenured teacher that's been there for 30-plus years, right, she probably used to do some of the things that you wanted to do or that you would like to do. But, she kept getting the old school ruler slap on her hand because she wasn't raising the test scores. So it kind of takes out or the argument is you take out the ingenuity because all year I'm teaching for the test. So how do you marry making cramming impossible versus these data points that teachers need to make?
Okay. In the last one, next to the last chapter of the book is a chapter is devoted to one 5th grade teacher. Cody Arute is her name. She's in South Sioux City, Nebraska. And so I said to her, I've been working with her about 12 years, and I said, Cody, when the state test came up, I know that the average school spends 6 to 8 weeks practicing for the state test. How long did you spend getting your kids ready for the state test? She thought about it, and she said, well, maybe 5 minutes, but I don't think I spent that long. So what's the difference? If you know that they've remembered what you taught instead of just remembering it for Friday, you don't need to spend time getting ready for the state test. It takes care of itself because they remember it. And then for many, many, many teachers, because there's such pressure for the state test scores, which are given, say, in March or April. Let's say they're given in the middle of April. And there's such pressure to get those test scores up. So the kids are exhausted, the teachers are exhausted, and the take test is over, and what does the teacher say? Oh, thank goodness the test is over. Now we can have fun the rest of the year.
Mm-hmm.
Which means we're not going to spend much attention on learning. So we wasted 6 weeks getting ready for the test, cramming it again. And then when it's over, we got another 6 weeks before school's out, and we're not going to teach them a whole lot because we're so exhausted from all that state test.
Yeah, it's not a laughing matter.
So that's a common scenario. So when I talk about there's root causes why our country is not doing as well.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't look for root causes, we look for blame.
Mm-hmm.
It depends on who you are. If you're if you're a teacher, you may blame the teachers and if you're a teacher, you may blame the administrators and the parents. Mm-hmm. If you're a parent, you blame the teachers. Okay? If you're a school board member, you may blame the principals. Okay? But it's not getting to what the actual problem is.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Let me ask you this about you had dedicated to that teacher in Nebraska. And as I look or prepared for the podcast, I was looking at, I love graphs, right, in the business world. And when you look at the literacy rate across the country, it seems that it's a historic image. Like I could pull it up for an image that was created in 2019 since they haven't done anything for 2020 yet. And I can I can superimpose that over a map in 1915, 1920, let's just do 100 years, and it would be identical. And what happens, it seems like there's these really strong spots in the Northeast and then on the West Coast, and the South has historically been down in the dumps. So I want to get your take on the root causes from a national level, and why is it that some regions are performing better than others?
I don't know that I know all of those reasons. I do believe that money has something to do with it. Okay, that the money put into education, and it's not because the teachers make more money. Because if the teachers make more money, they're probably in a community where the housing is more expensive. Mm-hmm. So the leftover money for the teacher to plan for retirement and go on vacations is probably no different in any part of the country. Because if we just compare salary to salary, that does no good. You have to say compare salary to housing costs and then say, and then do a comparison. But in places where they've funded education better, what I see is in particularly in elementary, I see the art teachers, I see the music teachers, I see the PE teachers, the technology. I see in the high schools a much more of a focus on the arts than other schools can afford. And I think that's a part of it, that it's such a well-rounded education. My career was in California. I was in several school districts. I never met an elementary art teacher or an elementary music teacher the time I was there. So I do think that money has something to do with it, but I'm not going to say that's all that has to do with it. Okay.
Well, let me ask it in another way. So let's just use California, where you were. And I mentioned historically I did 100 years, but let's go back a little bit farther. So if I look at the Civil War, right, the way we learned it in school, it was North versus South. And then when you fast forward today in education, it looks like in every city, in the northern side of the city, they have more funding versus the South. And it seems unilateral across. I mean, there's going to be some exceptions. But did you see the disparity on the city level from funding?
Yes. I have basically observed that the inner city schools are not usually funded as well as the suburban schools. Mm-hmm. I never looked at it on north and south of the core of the city. Mm-hmm. I've just looked at it from the funding level.
Right. Because I'm thinking, yesterday was, and it's so hard for me. I know that some people that listen to the podcast are sports fans like I am, and it's just really, this year is unprecedented for the most part.
Yes.
Outside of 1918. But this year it's hard for me to watch the NBA just because it's football season. But nonetheless, as it relates to this conversation, you have the LA Lakers, which is LeBron. And traditionally, for people like LeBron and others, if they're in the inner city, but they have this raw talent, then from an athletic standpoint, the athletic school administrators, if you will, the coaches, come to the inner city, and then they take those kids out of those schools to go to the northern schools because that's where, like you said, the funding is. If they get state champs and what have you, the boosters, they get a lot of money. I'm just asking, when you're talking about state school tests, it just seems on the surface everybody knows there's disparity, and how could we bridge those gaps? Because there seems like they're well-grained into keeping it the way it is.
Yeah, and I know that there's people that their focus is the disparity. I'm not discounting the disparity. I'm not convinced that we can't all do better. I'd like all the schools do better. You've got a school with 1,000 kids, and let's say that 90% of their kids are meeting state standards, so they're considered one of the best school districts in the state. Mm-hmm. Well, if you look at it year after year after year after year, it's still only 90% of the kids meeting state standards. It doesn't change very much. It might go to 91, it might drop to 89, might go to 82, then back to 91. But that school district has a problem. They got 10% of their kids year after year after year not making it. And they're doing nothing about it because everybody says they're one of the best schools in the whole state. And so they get honored and applauded and everything's great. But it's not. They're failing 10% of their kids every year. Now, other school districts might be, if you go to one of the reservation schools here in Arizona, you might find that 80% of the kids didn't meet standards. And so kind of what you read in the introduction, our state tests do nothing to help them. They just discourage them year after year after year. So there's a huge gap. But my focus is saying, how do we set up a system so we honor people for getting better? So the school districts that are at 90% year after year after year should not be honored. They're not improving. They're still failing 10% every year. And they have the resources. That's a crime. I see that as just as big a problem as the one that only has 20% of their kids meeting state standards. They're not improving either because it's a ranking system, and we make sure they don't.
I want to ask you, and I wasn't in the system that long. I only taught a year, and it was second grade. I loved it. It was great. So please forgive me. The first half of the year, one of the older teachers kind of put their arm around me and told me about, to keep them quiet. I'm like, I can't keep these kids quiet, right? So they're like, hey, if you incentivize them with like a snack if they complete their work or to stay quiet or what have you. And it was through the roof. I thought that we actually had a pipeline to the dentist's office with all the candy and stuff that they got. But in all seriousness, kids, I think the human nature, we need some incentivizing.
Okay. So
we do that.
I didn't get to my third root cause, and you just described it. It's bribery.
Okay.
It's bribery. Okay. So I said in my seminars, I will say to the people in the audience, talk to the people next to you and come to an agreement. How many of these incentives, which is the polite word, or bribe, which is the real word, how many do they receive per day in your school? And I get somewhere between 3 a day and 20 a day, somewhere in between. But the most common is 5. So then I say to people in the audience, okay, take out your cell phone, and there's a calculator that comes with it. Enter 5, or whatever number it is that you agreed in your small group right there, and let's say it's 5. So they enter 5 in. Okay, now there's typically 180 school days in a year. So multiply 5 times 180. Okay. Now there's 13 years. Unless you've got a pre-kindergarten, that makes 14 years. So whatever it is in your school system, either multiply it by 13 or by 14, depending on how many years of school you offer, and multiply that and see how many incentives the kids receive in school through their education. Mm-hmm. Well, if there's no pre-K and there's a kindergarten, it's 13 years, and it's 5, you come up with 10,700 incentives or bribes that the kids receive. Mm-hmm. So I say, are the 10,000 bribes that kids are receiving, is it working? Is it helping kids learn more? And I'll say, no, it's not working. It's not working. Okay? So what do you replace bribes with? And what we replace them with is the term is called all-time best, the ATB, the schools where I work. ATB is the most common phrase in the school. It stands for, and it means I did better than I've ever done before. And we honor the kids when they do better than they've done before. It's a thank you. It's nothing big. We don't give them anything. It's just great. I can't believe it. This is the 5th time this year you've done better than you ever did before. Wow, you're getting smart. And then I told you we add up the total for the whole class. Well, every time the class has an all-time best, the kids get to celebrate. It's now we don't give them things. We create memories. Mm-hmm. And so I've got a picture of a class here in Arizona. They are a 3rd grade class, and they are doing the wave. So when the class has an all-time best, the teacher puts on band music from a high school a university football game, puts on the band music. The kids get in the circle and they do the wave. That's their celebration. It's a team thing. It's every kid in the room. It's not, if you do this, then you get to go to the ice cream party, but if you don't get to go to the ice cream party. No, we don't do that. We add up the total for the whole class, and you get to celebrate. And here's the tearjerker. I've heard this so many times from teachers. Here's a kid that's struggling in the room, and the kid doesn't do as well as lots of other people in the room, but on the weekly assessment, the kid got 2 questions right, and the class had more right than ever before. And the kid jumps up and does a chest pump and says, "It was me. It was me. Because of my 2, I put us over the top, and we all get to celebrate." Mm-hmm. We know that from athletics. A kid's a mediocre athlete, sitting on the bench for the basketball game. The coach puts the kid in, and the other team knows the kid's not a very good player, so they foul him on purpose. And he makes a free throw, and the team wins by 1 point. Does the kid hang his head and say, "Woe is me, I only got 1 point"? No. He says, "It was me. It was me, guys. It was my point. I won the game. It was my point." Mm-hmm. That's what happens in classrooms all the time. And so that's data for joy. We replace the bribes with celebrations of doing better than you've ever done before.
Now, let's stay there for a second with the same analogy and achieving the all-time best, because your book is The Perfect School, and I'm thinking of, and maybe not so much a bribery anymore, but okay. I'm thinking of the perfect state, right? Because fortunately or unfortunately, for 2020, we've seen top-down, there's some states that are faring better, some states that are getting access to medical items, or let's just say items, than other states. And I'm just thinking of people there's a huge migrations that are happening with people losing their job and they're relocating. And usually when you relocate, there's apps now that tell you the best schools. I mean, in a perfect world, a perfect school, it would be a state. Oh, I'm going to this state because no matter what school I'm going to, it's uniform top down. And how can we get that school that's used to scoring that 1 point to improve, or get the other schools to lift up that one school that's only scoring 1 point? Is that possible?
Yes, it's possible. I've talked with state leaders who have that desire. They haven't always convinced the journalists of their dream. because every year the journalists put out an article, which is a ranking article of the best schools to the worst schools.
Right.
Yeah. And so it turns out that the journalism graduate that's 2 years out of college has never taught school, sometimes has more power over the system than the educator who's been in education for 40 years is now the state leader. It's a difficult one because it's a part of the culture that we rank people based on raw score, not on did they improve. But yes, it would be the ideal. Now since the book title you mentioned, How to Create a Perfect School, I need to define perfect for you. Okay. Here's the definition. Children start school with all the motivation they need. It's internal, intrinsic motivation. They have all they need for life when they start kindergarten. So a perfect school is one that maintains that love of learning for the next 12 years. Right now, by the time we get to ninth grade, 2/3 of the kids don't want to be there. So it makes it really hard for teachers to get the learning in their heads that they're accountable for helping them learn when 2/3 of them don't want to be there. But it's not true in kindergarten. They almost all want to be there, and they love it. And so in teacher education, teachers are told how to motivate the kids to learn. That's terrible advice. Our job is not to motivate them to learn. They come into the system already motivated. Our job is to maintain the enthusiasm that they brought with them. That's a different mindset on motivation. When I'm speaking, I don't want anybody ever to introduce me to an audience and say, here's Lee Jenkins, a motivational speaker. I'm not a motivational speaker. I don't know. If I look at a crowd of 500 teachers, I don't know how to motivate the teacher who's demotivated. Okay, I don't know how to do that. And there's a few, not many. When I surveyed teachers, they said it's about 4%. I don't know how to motivate that 4%. And secondly, so the 96% that are already motivated, when they think that the superintendent brought somebody in to motivate them, that demotivates them.
Right.
Yeah. You understand that?
Yeah.
How could the superintendent think we need to be motivated? We're already motivated. We need help. We need things to help us do better, but we don't need to be motivated. We're already motivated. And you brought in a speaker to motivate us. That demotivates me when you think I need to be motivated. Okay, you understand that? Okay.
Right.
So, yeah.
I want to ask you about this conference. So, not in this particular conference, but one thing that I found funny as a former educator is sitting in these conferences and, like you said, to be motivated or for whatever reason. And then, ultimately people need to get up, walk around, they start talking, even when the speaker is speaking sometimes. And so in class, I'm laughing because we all, as adults, we say, do as I say, not as I do. And in some of these classrooms, these kids are supposed to be quiet for hours on end. So how can you when you're a first grader? And in some of these schools, they've taken out recess, right? You can't even let your hair down. So is it important to bring
I've been there.
Right.
Yeah, I've been there. Yeah. Well, actually, I was in an elementary school, where they took out recess, and I was very frustrated, so I started checking what is going on. Well, in my experience in elementary schools, both as an administrator and as a teacher, when I was a teacher, elementary, we had a 15-minute recess in the morning, and we had a 30-minute lunch. Okay. The union in that particular district, which was run by high school teachers, they had in their contract, and they would not budge, that teachers had 45 minutes for lunch. So that took away the 15-minute recess at the elementary school. Because the state tells you how many minutes of instruction you're supposed
Right.
to have. So
Right.
there was the root cause. They couldn't come to an agreement with the superintendent. The teachers union and the superintendent couldn't come to an agreement for the kids to have a recess in the morning.
Huh.
So it was different than what I thought. It wasn't done
Sure.
for more time grinding away in the books. That wasn't the reason. So anyway, I'm just sharing that. If you don't dig down and find out what the root cause is, you end up blaming somebody for taking away recess, which was not a good idea.
Right. Wow. Is there an association? Because, even again in 2020, to be topical, there has been the encouragement to at least get some fresh air and get out. And for the most part, or at least at the beginning, like March, April, people were scared to leave their homes. Even the gyms were closed. But it seems like, I'll use myself as an example. If I don't exercise, I don't get away from the laptop. And when I don't get away from the laptop, it's not giving me that time to create outside of what's immediately in front of me. And I'm just wondering if you were able to find a connection between exercise and learning.
Lots and lots of people have written on that. And that's not my expertise, so I don't really want to comment on that. But many, many people have written on that. And what I've read is pretty conclusive, that there is a connection. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And you researched 301 classrooms, and let's just say you worked at the elementary level, and it was a perfect school, striking success. But at middle school and high school, they didn't have it. So how do you keep that momentum going if they're not going to have that love of learning or that environment that's not embracing them like their previous school had it?
Okay, the kids in the middle and the high school enjoy their all-time best as much as elementary kids.
Mm-hmm.
On my video, on my website, there's a video. The website is lbelj.com, but there's the video there is from a middle school, 7th grade. Mm-hmm. And when the kids have their personal best, and this is prior to COVID, of course, when the video was done, but what do the middle school kids do because they have their personal best? They go up and write their name on the whiteboard and they high-ten the teacher. That's it. They love it. Just before schools got closed down in March, 3 high school kids came to this middle school class because that teacher was their teacher when they were in middle school. And they got out, they had a minimum day, the high school did. They got out early, and the middle school was still in session, so they went to visit their former middle school teacher. Mm-hmm. So they go in, and school's still in session, and the kids look on the wall, and they see all the graphs, which is adding up the total for the class and other things we've mentioned. Mm-hmm. And they said, "Oh, you're still doing the L to J process." Mm-hmm. And the teacher, Alan Kolbster's name, he's also mentioned in the book. He said, "Yes, I'm still doing L to J." And then what do these high school kids say on an afternoon off? Can we take another quiz? Mm. Because the quiz is how you prove you're getting smarter. Okay? So he said to his middle school kids, "Do you mind if we have an extra quiz? These high school kids want to take a quiz." They said, "No, it's okay." So the 3 high school kids sat down in the middle school, and he gave them a history quiz, just like they had just one of the normal quizzes. And by the way, our quizzes are not by over chapters. They're a random sample from the whole year. Okay, so anyway, they took a quiz. What did they do? They all 3 went up and wrote their name on the whiteboard and high-tened the teacher. High school, okay? It's not complicated. And in high school, the celebrations are obviously different. I guess one of the ones that's most interesting is the teachers asking the kids how we could celebrate all-time best in our Algebra 2 class. And what the kids landed on, they said was, okay, every time our class has an all-time best, then all of us in the class, we're going to empty change in our pocket and put it in a bucket. And so then that's what they did. It was great fun. They go, oh, great, we had an all-time best. And they reach in their pocket, take the change, and put it in the bucket. And then at the end of the year, they gave $87 to the local Humane Society.
Nice.
So,
very nice.
See, we don't think that. We think bribery in our culture. Oh, we have to give the kids ice cream to do it. Well, they're 11th graders. They don't care about the ice cream. Whatever, No. It's that celebration. We did better than we've done before. Look at all those $1 million athletes. Paid $1 million a year minimum. And what do they do when they win the game? They celebrate. Right?
Mm-hmm.
The coach doesn't say, okay, we won today. Here's an extra pile of money for you. No. They celebrate. And, yeah, that's what the kids like. They like to celebrate.
Let me ask you a continuity question. So what you described is a perfect part of, I guess, just childhood, where you kind of you get older and you feel nostalgic about your second grade teacher and you go visit that person. And I'm sure people listening are remembering, like for me, I'm thinking of my second grade teacher. But today with online, is there a way to encourage like a continuity where let's say the segment of those middle schoolers that are in that high school that's missing what they had to motivate them can get together online at least, so they're still getting what they're missing from middle school?
I'm not the one to ask because I don't know how to do it. There may be people that know how, but my opinion on that is that you could, if there were times during the year when you did meet as a class with the teacher, so you knew each other personally and you knew the teacher personally, and that might tie the online learning together more. I think this year for online is harder than last year.
Yeah.
Because last year it was with the teacher they already knew that was continuing. And this year they're starting off with somebody that's a stranger.
Right. That also that brings up my next point, Lee, because here in the States, right, no more teachers, no more books, no more teachers' dirty looks or whatever that song was, and you run away for 3 months, and when you come back to school in the fall, it takes a quarter just to remember. So in your perfect school, would that be a year-round school? How do you keep that going?
I was a principal of a year-round school, so I don't believe that the calendar is the secret to our success. I don't believe it. The problem is they don't remember it. We blame it on summer. Oh, the kids forgot this all the summer. No, they didn't forget it over the summer. They didn't remember it past the weekend. But we blame it on summer. But it's not summer. They didn't remember it. They had permission to forget. Alan Culp, the 7th grade class that I was in, I was in there and I said, okay, I've been talking to your 8th grade teacher next door, and I think she's going to do the same LTJ quizzes next year. But I'm not sure. Now, you have 100 concepts to learn, key concepts to learn in history this year, and every week you get a quiz on 10 of the 100 at random. The teacher chooses 10 at random. You know that because it's on a computer program that chooses them at random, and those are your questions. And, of course, you miss a whole bunch in the beginning of the year. So you have an L curve in the middle of the year, at the beginning of the year, and then you have a bell curve in the middle of the year, and then you're trying to get to a J curve by the end because you remember it. Okay. So your 8th grade teacher is considering doing this. Now, she's got a choice. She's been talking to your Mr. Culp, your 7th grade teacher, and so she could do the same thing and give 100 key historical facts for 8th grade and quiz you on 10 each. It's almost every week. Quiz you on 10 at random from the whole year each week. Or she could give you a 12-item quiz each week, and it would be 10 questions coming from 8th grade, and 2 would be she just gets Mr. Culp's 7th grade, and she just asks you 2 of his questions, just like you had this year, just two of them, and said, "Does this vote? Do you want me to advise your 8th grade teacher next year when you're there to give you 10 questions from 8th grade, or do you want 12, which includes 2 7th grade?" Every hand went up and said, we want to have 2 7th grade questions.
Mm-hmm.
You don't think that, but no, they feel smart. They want to read. And so when I talked to her the next year, she said, I don't think any one kid that was here last year missed any of those 2 questions.
Hmm.
They didn't forget it over the summer. They knew from the whole system was, I have to put this into my long-term memory because I never know what's coming up at random.
Mm.
I don't know what's coming. It's not like a chapter test that I can go home and study on Thursday night. No, I've got the list for the whole year. Mr. Cope gave me the list for the whole year. I've got it. But I can't cram all 100. That's too much.
Right.
So I just got to have to learn it.
Right.
I don't have a choice, but just learn it. And they remember it because they know they have to put it in their long-term memory. They know that.
Sure. Now, from that example, from the 7th grade teacher to the 8th grade teacher, my question is, what is the tipping point for the perfect school that it becomes standard? Does it have to be the continuity to 3 grades, 4, first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth? Is there a tipping point where this can start to be a structural format for teaching?
I have never seen it become a structural format without a strong commitment from the school superintendent.
Mm-hmm.
Even the principal, it's difficult for the principal to do. It's not, and there's some very, very dedicated principals that are doing wonderfully with what I teach. The problem is that the superintendent has a new idea, and that new idea takes time and energy and money, and so then other things that were done can fade away. So I've never seen it unless the school superintendent is in the workshops, understands it, is going around honoring kids, honoring schools, because there's not only a total for, there's not only how each kid's doing and a total on the wall for how the class is doing. Down by the office, there's a total for how the whole school's doing.
Right.
And you add up the totals from every classroom. It's simple addition. Add it up.
Mm.
And we started talking about state assessment. Addition would work.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't, because the states change the test every 5 years.
Mm.
So you just finally get so you understand what the standards are and what's expected, and then they change every 5 years.
Right.
There's no constant. But yeah, it takes really good leadership from the top for it to become the way things are done.
So what I'm hearing, Lee, is if I was in, elementary school and I learned the LTJ process, and then I used that in high school and I became older and I started having my own kids, you're talking about voting on the local level to reinforce the superintendents that are going to use these breakthrough ways to become a perfect school.
That's correct. Yep. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It takes a school board that understands, because, think about it. There are people in every town who are pressuring their kids to cram, get good grades, and get scholarships.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when you take away cramming as a possibility, you actually have to learn it.
Mm-hmm.
You have some people that get upset. They're not interested in learning. They're interested in that scholarship.
Right.
So
I've seen it.
Yeah, it takes everybody. But it is really deep within our culture. We use data for harm, not for joy. Mm-hmm. We bribe instead of celebrating. And you don't have to learn it. You just have to cram it for the test.
I want to ask you about a trend that I have to give a shout out to my little. I did a 10-year commitment, if you will, and I don't think it stopped, but from the Big Brother, Big Sister program, it stopped once they graduated. And one thing that we saw, speaking with some other parents, was a lot of the seniors at this school, they had gone to neighboring private schools their whole matriculation through school, except for senior year. And they had a leg up on the public school kids, and as a result, they got a lion's share of the scholarships. So, what's your take on that strategy that's happening in these schools where you may think you're coasting when you're a junior, and then you're going to get your clock cleaned from your neighbor across town that's now at your school?
I've not heard of that before.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, that shows that shows a lack of my. I'm not surprised.
Mm-hmm.
Not surprised.
Let me ask you the other side of that.
Yeah.
So the other side of that is, and this was on 60 Minutes not too long ago. So, and shout out to Malcolm Gladwell, because that book, The Outliers, is talking about the 2009. So with regard to school, they use the example of Canada. And in Canada, kindergarten starts at 5 years old. So what was happening with the hockey teams is the parents waited until they were 6 years old. And then that way they kind of grew, they're not hulks or anything like that, but they're bigger than they are in fifth grade. As a result, their confidence was through the roof and all that, and they became better players because of that. And when 60 Minutes talked about it, they said from an education standpoint, if the boys started a year later, they would fare better in school. And then that when we're talking about disparities, they were saying that, well, parents that could afford to do that can do it. But if you get family leave for like 2 weeks or something, you're right back at school. Your kids, you're back at work. Your kid's suffering. What's your take on that?
Well, I know that it's done a lot, and it's for athletics. I've not heard about this for the academics, but it's for all those reasons. I guess a lot of times it works, particularly if the student is a good athlete, and they end up being successful for it. But there are a number of kids that, where the parents did this for the best of intentions. In fact, we have close friends who did that. And when their son was a senior, he looked around and there were no other 19-year-old seniors.
Mm-hmm.
And he had a girlfriend who was 19, and his girlfriend was going to community college.
Mm-hmm.
And he was 19, supposed to go to his senior year of high school.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want parents to think that, yes, you may redshirt them for a year, but you might have a huge problem when your son or daughter doesn't want to be a 19-year-old senior.
Mm. Gotcha.
And we don't think that way always. We don't look at the whole picture.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're the 19-year-old senior getting the hockey scholarship for college, then it turned out okay.
Right.
But if at 14 he says, I hate hockey, you still got a 19-year-old senior who doesn't understand why they can't be in college.
Yeah. I'm laughing too hard at that. We had a family member did volleyball until like 14. I mean, she was 6, and we were just like, yeah, she's going to college for vol. I don't like it anymore. I mean, it's for parents that hear that. So I had cut you off earlier about you were going through your list for the perfect school, and I wanted to.
Let me just tell you the outline of the book. Okay. The first part is what is perfect, and it's we keep our intrinsic motivation.
Mm-hmm.
And then how do you measure intrinsic motivation? You said, well, what is it? Well, intrinsic motivation is there's 2 things. It's the joy we get and the effort we put. It's a combination of joy and effort. Mm-hmm. John Hattie, a famous Australian educator, gave us the triplets of joy, of skill, will, and thrill. So if the skill is what we want them to learn, but the will and the thrill is what brings it about. And if they lose their will to work hard, and they lose their thrill from the learning, then that goes down. So we define intrinsic and how to measure it. The second part is what did we inherit that's causing kids to lose their intrinsic motivation, and those are the 3 things we talked about. The third part are the replacements. What can you do so kids keep their will? What can you do so they keep their thrill? And we talked about that. That's the celebrations, the joy from doing better than you've ever done before, being a part of a team, helping a team succeed. And the last part is instruction. It's polishing perfect. And we do that through pattern, giving kids the pattern so they can see what's going on, and choices. So I'll give you one example from that third part of the book. I learned this from a high school teacher in West Virginia. But when he gave an assignment, he said to his students, okay, here's what you have to prove to me you've learned. Here's 3 ways you can prove to me you learned it. But if you've got another idea how you can prove to me you learned it, come talk to me. So he said his favorite example was an 11th grader in U.S. history did all of her assignments, or almost all, for a whole year in U.S. history with political cartoons. She proved through the cartoons she understood the history. I had a teacher, I was sharing this with a group of teachers, and a teacher came up break and said, you know, if I'd had that option in high school, I would have done so well in high school. Because all I cared about in high school was theater. I would have connected every assignment every teacher gave to theater. I would have figured it out. But as it was, they said, here's what you have to learn, and here's how you're going to prove it. No choices.
Right.
So one of the ways that we polish perfect is by giving kids choices. It can start in kindergarten and first grade with simple things like, what word would you like to learn to read today? I mean, we give them these stupid books to learn to read in first grade. The fat cat sat on the mat with the rat or something. You know, it's phonetic. It all rhymes, but the kids don't care about the fat cat sitting on the rat or on the mat. So if you say, what word do you want to learn to read today? And the kid says Lamborghini. The teacher says, oh, my goodness, how do you spell that? Well, let's get the phone out, and we'll figure it out, and there's your word today. And guess what? All the phonics is included in the words kids ask for. It's all there. So at any grade, when you give kids choices, you are polishing perfect.
Now, at the beginning, we were talking about the disparity in the school test and just school overall, depending on funding and what have you. Have you ever looked at, you were talking about the team effort with some of the students. Has there been a team effort type outreach for the schools that don't have these? Like, let's say a school is underfunded and they want to have it, and there's probably a small interest into the L2J. Is there a way to partner maybe on the weekend with one of the schools that are employing your strategies?
I don't think so. It may be. I mean, it spreads. I got a call from North Carolina teacher a couple of weeks ago, and I said, and I looked on the map where she was, because I've worked in North Carolina, but not where she is. How did this happen? Oh, I used to work in Oklahoma, and I heard you speak there. I was using your process in Oklahoma, and I moved. So, yes, but pretty much people need to have direct help themselves.
Yeah, I'm thinking from...
but it is a system problem. It's not a people problem. Back to Deming, I mentioned earlier, he said, when things go wrong, we just need to remember that 96% of the time it's caused by the way we do things. And 4% of the time it's caused by people just messing up. He then said, if everybody in your organization did their very, very best, almost all of our problems would still be there. Because there's a system. And the system from the state level ranks the schools. So if every teacher in every school and every principal in every school did their very, very best, when the year's over, they're going to rank the schools top to bottom. And they're going to discourage the schools who most need help. So then the next year, not as many teachers are going to do their best because they know they can't win. They're stuck. They can't do anything about it.
Right.
I've got kids that are from poverty backgrounds, no matter what I do, it's going to come out in the newspaper that we're a terrible school, and consequently I'm going to say in the newspaper I'm a terrible teacher.
Mm-hmm.
So why try my best? Doesn't make any difference.
Mm. Well, there are strength in numbers, especially this year. We're seeing some inklings of some changes. And for people listening to the podcast that probably never heard of your process and they want to learn more so you can speak to their administrators so they don't continue this structure that's failing our kids ultimately, how could they get in touch with you? I believe you have social media in addition to your site as well.
Yeah, the email is the easiest. It's Lee at, and it's 6 letters, L, the letter L, the first letter of my name, Lee, the word bell, as ring the bell, and the letter J, Lee at lbelljay.com. Okay. Now, it's really not, the L to J is not about my name. It's the histogram going from the L curve to the bell curve in the middle of the year to the J curve. But
love it.
That's the easiest, lbelljay.com, Lee at lbelljay.com.
Very nice, very nice. Well, is there any question that I forgot to ask you that you'd like to get across for the audience?
I think you've done really well.
Thank you.
And I hope that people who are frustrated with education don't blame the teachers, don't blame the administrators. There is a system there that's working against their best efforts that can be fixed. It can be.
Mm-hmm. It's definitely encouraging, and we have people like you that are out there fighting the fight for sure. So with that,
thank you.
You have been tuned to another episode of Intrinsic Motivation from a Homie's Perspective. This is Hamza. Lee, it was a pleasure. Please keep us in mind when you have more things coming down, and we'd love to hear how this continues on.
Well, I can tell you that I am working now on a project. The books are on Amazon because that loss of intrinsic motivation most often occurs, it starts with the reading programs.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've had this desire for years. Things have slowed down, so I'm doing it. And I am publishing books that are unique in the market for early readers as they learn to read. They are either rewrites of Bible stories or rewrites of Aesop fables.
Mm-hmm.
And those are there on Amazon. If you were to look up Lee Jenkins on Amazon, there's a number of authors with the name Lee Jenkins. But if you did that, you would find the books. The first one is A Day with Jesus, the story of Zacchaeus. The
Mm-hmm.
second one is A Week with Joshua. The third one, which will be out next month, is An Evening with Daniel, the Lion's Den Theater. And the first Aesop book is Who's Afraid of a Lion? Aesop's Bully Fable. So anyway, they're there. So maybe we talk more about that and reading and how we keep that love of reading and don't make them hate reading early on. I had a teacher told me that a first grader said to a new kid to their school, first grade said, "Welcome to reading hell."
Oh, no.
Yeah, we don't want that. We don't want that.
We don't want that. We don't want that.
Yeah.
Lee, it was a pleasure, and let's definitely stay in touch.
Okay, Hamza. Appreciate it. Bye now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.